The wedding photo is still on his phone. He has not deleted it. He told me that when he sent me his story, and I think about that detail more than almost anything else he shared. A man who lost his retirement, his savings, and 3 years of his life, and he still cannot bring himself to delete the wedding photo. He is 58 in that photo. She is 24. He is wearing a Guayabera shirt, white linen, pressed. She is in a dress the color of cream, her hair down, and she is smiling the way people smile when they are absolutely certain of something. He is smiling too. He told me that was the last day he felt completely sure of anything. By the time it was over, Gary Lundeen had lost $183,000. Not to a wire fraud scheme, not to a stranger with a fake profile on a dating app. He lost it inside a marriage, a real, legally registered Colombian civil marriage, to a woman he had known for 14 months before the ceremony, a woman whose family he had met, whose apartment he had visited, whose university degree hung framed on her wall. If it could happen to Gary, it could happen to almost anyone who has ever sat in a hotel bar in El Poblado and thought, "This city is extraordinary. These people are extraordinary. I could build something real here." While you are watching, let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. And if stories like this are something you want to hear more of, a subscription costs you nothing, and it helps me keep doing this work. My name is Gary Allen Lundeen, and I need to tell you about the 14 months I spent becoming someone I did not recognize, and the 3 years it took me to understand what had actually happened. ACT 2, I grew up in Rockford, Illinois. That matters, I think, not because Rockford is special, but because it is the kind of place that teaches you to take pride in being practical, in not being fooled. My father worked 31 years at an automotive parts plant and retired with a pension and a paid-off house and a very clear sense of what things were worth and what they were not. I inherited that from him, or I thought I did. I went to the University of Illinois, studied accounting, graduated in 1988, and spent the next 30 years building a career in corporate tax consulting. Mostly manufacturing clients, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin. I was not a flashy guy. I drove a Buick. I bought a 4-bedroom Colonial in Naperville in 1997 for $212,000, and it was worth $640,000 by the time I listed it in 2019. I had been married once, to Sandra. We met in 1991, married in 1994, and separated in 2016. We had 2 kids together. Bryce, who was 22 when all of this started, working in supply chain in Indianapolis, and Lauren, who was 20, finishing her junior year at Indiana University. The divorce was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. There was no affair, no explosion. It was more like a slow draining. 2 people who had been practical and responsible together for 20 years and had forgotten how to be anything else. Sandra told me during the mediation, in a sentence I replayed for years afterward, that I had never once in our marriage made her feel like she was worth being late for. I did not miss meetings. I did not miss deadlines. I missed things that could not be scheduled. I do not tell you that to ask for sympathy. I tell you that because it is the honest beginning of how I got to Medellin. After the divorce was finalized in late 2017, I did what I had always done. I worked. My practice had 4 employees at that point and billing around $900,000 a year. I bought a 2-bedroom condo in Naperville, hired a cleaning service, and told myself I was fine. And by most metrics I was. By 2019, my liquid assets were approximately $890,000 spread across brokerage accounts and a SEP IRA. I owned the condo outright. My car was paid off. My children were becoming self-sufficient. The math was good, but math is not a life. That is something I did not know how to say at 56. I knew how to say it at 61, sitting on a plastic chair in an apartment in Laurels with no working air conditioning, but not at 56. The pandemic is what cracked it open. I closed the office in March of 2020 and moved everything remote. My 2 senior accountants managed fine. My 2 junior staff were furloughed temporarily. For 3 months, I worked from my kitchen table and had almost no human contact. I am not unique in that experience. Millions of people lived through exactly the same thing. But I think the stillness showed me something I had been moving fast enough to avoid seeing. That I was deeply, profoundly alone in a way that had nothing to do with the virus. I started watching YouTube in the evenings. That is where it started. Videos about expat life in Colombia, Panama, Portugal, Mexico. Channels run by men who had left the American treadmill and found something looser, warmer, more alive. I watched probably 300 hours of that content between April and December of 2020. I told myself I was doing research. Maybe I was. But I was also doing something else. I was letting myself want something. The specific video that pushed me over the edge was not about romance. It was a 20-minute piece about property values in the El Poblado neighborhood of Medellin. The man in the video was a 53-year-old retired engineer from Arizona. And he was standing on a terrace with a mountain view that he said cost him $1,400 a month. He was not selling anything. He just looked genuinely happy in a way that I found almost foreign. I watched it 3 times. I called my brother in December of 2020 and told him I was thinking about spending 3 months in Colombia in the spring. He said, "Gary, you don't speak Spanish." I said I was going to learn. I enrolled in a Pimsleur course the following morning and started Duolingo that same night. I was not impulsive. I planned. I researched neighborhoods. I joined 3 expat Facebook groups. I read forums. I made spreadsheets. Of course, I made spreadsheets, comparing neighborhoods, average rents, cost of living indices, air quality data, altitude effects on sleep. By March of 2021, I had sublet my Naperville condo for 6 months, transferred operational control of my practice to my senior accountant on a temporary managing basis with a consulting arrangement, and booked a one-way ticket to Jose Maria Cordova. I was 57 years old. I had never lived outside Illinois, and I was more excited than I had been about anything since my children were born. I did not know what I was walking into, but I want to be precise about that. The things I did not know were not things I had been careless about. I had done what a careful, analytical man does when he makes a major decision. I had gathered information. I had made a plan. What I did not know how to account for. What no spreadsheet captures is the particular hunger that comes from 25 years of doing everything right and still ending up alone. That hunger was the door. Everything else was just someone's knowing how to open it. ACT3, I landed in Medellin on March 14, 2021 on an Avianca flight out of Miami. It was a Sunday. The taxi from Jose Maria Cordova came down into the valley, and I remember the moment the city came into view. All of it at once, this enormous bowl of lights and green hills and apartment towers, and the permanent warmth that hits you when you drop below 2,000 meters after a flight from the north. I had seen photographs. The photographs did not prepare me. I had rented an apartment in El Poblado on Calle 8 for $1,100 a month, furnished, 2 bedrooms, a small terrace, 23 floors up. It was by any honest comparison to what $1,100 bought in Naperville, a different universe. I stood on that terrace the first night with a glass of aguardiente I had bought at the tienda downstairs, and I thought, I should have done this 10 years ago. That thought. I have thought about it many times since. The expat community in El Poblado is not hard to find. You don't even have to look for it exactly. It finds you, because the same cafes and co-working spaces and restaurants keep attracting the same demographic. Within my first week, I had met half a dozen men in roughly my situation. American or Canadian or European, mid-40s to early 60s, professional backgrounds, recently divorced or long-term single, most of them on some version of trying this out. There was a warmth and solidarity in that group that I found genuinely nourishing. We would meet for coffee at a place near Barker Larras or for dinner at one of the restaurants along Provenza, and we would talk about the city and the food and our plans, and occasionally, with a careful casualness that I now recognize as practiced discretion. About the Colombian women. My closest friend in those early months was a man named Douglas Phipps. Doug was 60, a retired civil engineer from Portland, had been in Medellin for almost 2 years, spoke decent Spanish, and had what I envied as a kind of settled confidence about the place. He knew where to go. He knew how things worked. He introduced me to a local man named Andres Cardenas, who Doug used as a fixer-translator consultant, someone who could handle paperwork, negotiate leases, help with immigration questions, connect you to reliable tradespeople or lawyers. Andres was around 40, well-dressed, very easy to be around, with excellent English and a habit of making you feel like he was doing you a personal favor by including you in whatever he knew. I liked Andres immediately. I trusted him almost as quickly. Through Andres, through Doug, through the natural social gravity of El Poblado, I was introduced to the broader social world of the neighborhood. Dinner parties, gallery openings, a wine bar in Provenza that a Canadian architect had recently opened and which became something of a gathering spot for the expat-adjacent professional class of Medellin. Local architects, lawyers, people in real estate, designers. people who had been educated abroad or who worked with international clients and moved easily between Spanish and English. It was a world that felt sophisticated in a way that impressed me, and I now understand was designed to impress men exactly like me. I met Valentina Restrepo at a dinner party at a private apartment in El Poblado in late April. It was not a party for expats. It was the birthday gathering of a Colombian architect named Felipe, who I had met through Andres 2 weeks earlier. There were maybe 20 people. The apartment was on a high floor, and the city spread out below the terrace in every direction. Valentina was standing near the window talking to 2 other women when I noticed her. She was 23 at the time, I would learn. She had the composed, deliberate quality of someone who is used to being watched but has decided not to perform for it. I did not approach her. This is something I want to be clear about. She came to me. Or rather, she was brought to me by Felipe, who introduced her with the specific context that she spoke very good English and worked in marketing at a company that had several American clients. That framing mattered. She was not presented as available. She was presented as professional. We talked for maybe 40 minutes at that party. About marketing and communications. She had strong, articulate opinions about branding in Latin America for international companies. About Medellin, which she spoke about with both loyalty and clear-eyed criticism, the way people talk about complicated places they genuinely love. About the United States, which she had visited once to Miami for a trade conference. She asked more questions than she answered, which I experienced as attentiveness, and which I now understand may have been something more purposeful. At the end of the evening, she gave me her business card, an actual printed card, with her title, her company's name, and her email and phone number. She said, in English with no particular inflection, "If you'd like to practice your Spanish sometime, I'm reasonably patient." I texted her 4 days later. She responded 12 hours after that, not immediately, not after a week. 12 hours. I noted the timing. I told myself I was noting it because I was analytical by nature. I think now I was also noting it because some part of me was already trying to reverse engineer whether she was interested. We had coffee at a small place in Laureles that she chose. She ordered in Spanish and helped me order in Spanish without making it feel like a lesson. She was wearing a blazer and had a laptop bag. She had come from work. That detail mattered to me at the time. It confirmed her as a person with a life separate from mine. She paid for her own coffee. Over the next 6 weeks, we had coffee twice, dinner once, and walked through the botanical garden on a Saturday afternoon. She initiated contact as often as I did, sometimes more. She talked about her family. Her mother in Itagüí, her younger sister who was studying nursing in Bogotá, her father who had died when she was 15. She talked about her career ambitions. She wanted to start her own agency within 5 years. She talked about the city with a genuine, non-touristic intimacy that made me feel, in her company, that I was accessing something real about Medellin rather than the El Poblado version of it. There were things I noticed but filed without concern. Once, during our dinner, she took a call from someone and stepped away from the table for several minutes, then returned and said only that it was her sister. I did not question it. Once I arrived at her apartment building, she had given me the address to pick her up for a drive to Envigado. And the doorman greeted her with a familiarity that seemed to include a very slight hesitation when he saw me, a fractional pause before he smiled. I did not question that either. Once, on the Saturday at the Botanical Garden, a man across the path looked at her in a way that seemed like recognition, and she did not return his gaze. I noted it and then let it go. By the end of May, I was falling in love with her, or with something I was calling love. I want to be honest about that distinction because it matters. What I felt was real. It registered in me as real. It had the weight and the texture of real feeling. But I also think now that some part of what I was experiencing was not about Valentina specifically. It was about being 57 years old in a warm city, standing on a terrace at night, with a woman 33 years younger who looked at me with what seemed like full attention, and feeling, for the first time since, perhaps my children were small, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. She had not asked me for a single thing. That was the fact I kept returning to. In 7 weeks of spending time with this woman, she had never asked me for money, for gifts, for favors. She had paid for her own coffee. She had offered to pay for her half of dinner on 2 occasions, and I had insisted otherwise. She had a job. She had an apartment. She had a life. I had spent enough time reading expat forums to have a running internal checklist of early warning signs, and she had not touched one of them. I told Douglas about her in early June. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "How old is she?" 23, I said. He looked at me carefully, the way a friend does when he is deciding how honest to be. "Just take your time," he said. That's all I'd say. Take your time. I remember thinking he was being unnecessarily cautious. I remember thinking, I have been careful my entire life. I know how to assess a situation. I did not realize until much later that the period I had just described, those 7 weeks of patience, of paid coffees, of unasked favors, was not courtship. It was an evaluation. She had been deciding whether I was a viable candidate, and by June she had decided that I was.